The elevator doors opened with a quiet mechanical sigh, revealing a hallway so polished it reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. Inside the towering glass headquarters of Mercer Global Holdings, everything was immaculate. The marble floors gleamed. The air smelled faintly of expensive leather and imported coffee. Executives in tailored suits moved through the halls with the quiet urgency of people who believed the world revolved around their schedules. But there was one person in that building who moved almost completely unnoticed. Her name was Elena Vargas, and to everyone in that office, she was invisible. Every morning before sunrise, Elena arrived through the service entrance behind the building. She carried a small canvas bag filled with cleaning supplies and wore the same pale gray uniform that marked her as someone who existed on the very bottom rung of Mercer Global's towering hierarchy. At 53 years old, Elena had learned long ago that the most powerful people in the world often failed to see the ones standing directly in front of them. She moved quietly through the corridors, wiping fingerprints from glass doors, straightening chairs in conference rooms, emptying trash cans that still smelled faintly of the expensive dinners executives had eaten while discussing deals worth more money than Elena would see in 10 lifetimes. She never interrupted conversations, she never asked questions, she simply worked. And because of that, nobody noticed her, except for one person. But we will come back to him later. On that particular Monday morning, the building buzzed with unusual tension. Something was wrong. The executives had arrived hours earlier than usual, their voices sharp and anxious as they rushed in and out of the largest boardroom on the 41st floor. Inside that room sat the most powerful people in the company. At the head of the table was a man named Daniel Mercer. Daniel Mercer was the CEO of Mercer Global Holdings, a financial empire that controlled billions of dollars in technology investments, infrastructure projects, and international trade deals. At 38 years old, he had built a reputation as a ruthless strategist. People in the business world often described him with the same two words, brilliant and merciless. Daniel Mercer was not the kind of man who believed in luck. He believed in numbers, leverage, and control. And right now, something was slipping out of his control. Spread across the enormous table were dozens of documents, tablets, and financial models projected onto the wall-sized screen. The numbers didn't make sense. 3 hours earlier, Mercer Global had attempted to finalize a massive acquisition deal involving a European technology firm. The transaction was supposed to generate nearly $200 million in profit within the first year. Instead, something inside the financial model had triggered a catastrophic error. The projections had collapsed. Entire revenue streams disappeared from the calculations. The risk analysis suddenly suggested that the acquisition could cost the company hundreds of millions instead of earning it. How? He asked slowly. Does a $200 million deal suddenly turn into a financial black hole overnight? No one answered immediately. Around the table sat analysts, lawyers, financial engineers, and consultants who charged more money per hour than Elena earned in a week. Yet none of them could explain what had gone wrong. "We've checked the spreadsheets 3 times, one analyst said nervously. "The algorithm is rejecting the projections." Another executive added, "If we can't resolve this before the markets open tomorrow, the entire deal collapses." The room fell silent. Daniel Mercer stared at the projection on the wall. Lines of numbers, graphs, probabilities. Somewhere inside that model was a mistake. But no one could find it. And every minute that passed was costing them money. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, Elena Vargas pushed a small cleaning cart down the hallway. She stopped at the door to the executive conference room. Inside, the voices were loud enough that she could hear them through the thick glass. Normally, she would simply clean around the area and move on. But something unusual caught her attention. The projection on the boardroom screen was visible through the glass wall. Rows of financial equations, risk models, market variables. Elena paused, her eyes narrowed slightly. Because Elena Vargas had seen numbers like those before. A long time ago, back when her life had been very different. Inside the room, frustration was beginning to boil over. "We've run the analysis 6 times, then run it a 7th, Mercer said coldly. "We are not losing this deal because someone forgot how to use Excel." The tension in the room thickened. No one noticed the quiet cleaning woman standing outside the door, except the security guard at the end of the hallway. He watched Elena pause for several seconds, staring at the boardroom screen. Then he looked back down at his phone. assuming she was simply waiting to clean the room once the meeting ended. But Elena wasn't waiting. She was thinking. Her eyes moved slowly across the numbers on the projection. She didn't have access to the spreadsheet itself. But she didn't need it. Years ago, Elena Vargas had studied mathematics at the National University of Mexico. She had once been the top student in a graduate program for financial modeling. But life had not unfolded the way she had planned. Her husband had fallen ill. Medical bills had piled up. Immigration complications had forced her to leave school before finishing her degree. And eventually, survival had become more important than ambition. So Elena cleaned offices. And the world forgot that she had ever been brilliant. But numbers never forget the people who understand them. She studied the projection for another moment. Then she whispered quietly to herself. No, that wasn't right. One of the formulas was wrong, not obviously wrong, but subtly wrong. It was multiplying a variable that should have been averaged across quarterly projections. A small mistake. A tiny one. But in a model involving billions of dollars, that mistake would ripple outward like a stone thrown into a lake. And suddenly, Elena understood why the entire deal was collapsing. Inside the boardroom, Mercer slammed a folder shut. "This meeting is a waste of time," he said. "If nobody can solve this before tomorrow morning, we walk away from the deal." One of the younger analysts hesitated. "Sir, if we walk away now, the penalty clause alone is $30 million. Mercer didn't respond. He already knew that. The room fell silent again, and outside the glass wall, Elena made a decision. She pushed the cleaning cart slowly forward, and knocked gently on the door. Inside the room, 20 executives turned toward the sound. The door opened a few inches. A gray uniform, a cleaning cart, and a quiet woman standing in the doorway. One of the executives sighed impatiently. Not now," he said. "We're in the middle of something." Elena nodded politely. "I understand," she said softly. "I only needed 1 minute." Daniel Mercer didn't even look at her. "Come back later," he said flatly. But Elena didn't leave. She stepped slightly closer to the door. "I think I know what's wrong with the model." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then a few executives exchanged confused looks. One of them laughed, not cruelly, just dismissively. "You know what's wrong?" Elena nodded once. "There's a multiplication error in the third variable on the revenue forecast." The room fell completely silent. Daniel Mercer slowly lifted his head. For the first time, he looked directly at the cleaning woman standing in the doorway. And something in his expression changed. Not belief, not yet, but curiosity. Because the mistake she had just described was exactly the part of the model they had been struggling with. Mercer leaned back slightly in his chair. "How," he asked carefully, "would you know that?" Elena glanced again at the projection on the wall. Then she said something that no one in that room expected to hear. Because the model assumes compound growth on a quarterly distribution." She paused. "But the variable you're multiplying was already annualized." A ripple of confusion moved through the room. One analyst quickly typed into his laptop. He adjusted the formula, ran the model again. The numbers recalculated, the screen refreshed. And suddenly, the projection stabilized. The catastrophic loss disappeared. The $200 million profit returned. For several seconds, no one in the room said a word. They simply stared at the screen. Then slowly the analyst looked up. "It worked." Another executive leaned forward. "Forward, fixed it." Daniel Mercer's eyes returned to the woman standing in the doorway, the invisible cleaner. The woman no one had noticed for 3 years. The woman who had just solved a problem that 20 financial experts couldn't. And in that moment, something shifted inside the room. Because the most powerful people in the building had just realized something extraordinary. The person who saved their deal was the one person they had never even bothered to see. Daniel Mercer rose slowly from his chair. For a man who commanded thousands of employees and moved markets with a single phone call, he suddenly looked uncertain. He walked toward the doorway, and the other executives parted like water around a stone. He stopped a few feet from Elena, studying her face as if searching for some hidden explanation. Her uniform was neat but faded. Her hand still rested on the handle of the cleaning cart. She did not look away. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice quieter than anyone in the room had ever heard it. "Elena Vargas," she said. "Elena Vargas," he repeated as if tasting the syllables. How long have you worked? 3 years she had walked these hallways, emptied these wastebaskets, wiped fingerprints off this very conference room door. 3 years, and he had never once seen her. The analyst who had corrected the formula spoke up hesitantly. Mr. Mercer, the deal is back on track. We can finalize before the market opens." Mercer barely acknowledged him. He kept his eyes on Elena. "You understood that model instantly," he said. "Our best people stared at it for hours." "Where did you learn financial modeling?" Elena hesitated. The weight of old memories pressed against her chest. She could feel the eyes of the entire room boring into her, and for a moment she considered simply excusing herself and returning to her cart. But something in Mercer's question wasn't demanding. It was genuinely curious. "I studied mathematics at the National University of Mexico," she said. "Many years ago. I was in a graduate program for quantitative finance. I didn't finish." "Oh, why not?" She paused. The answer to that question contained years of grief, of hospital corridors, of papers she had signed to withdraw from classes so she could work double shifts. But she only said, "A life took a different path." Mercer nodded slowly. Around him, several executives were already gathering their documents, eager to move forward with the corrected deal, desperate to pretend the entire awkward episode had never happened. But Mercer raised a hand to stop them. "Wait," he said. He turned to the room. "Take 10 minutes, nobody leaves yet." The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances but obeyed. Mercer gestured for Elena to step inside the boardroom. She hesitated, looking down at her gray uniform, at the cart full of bottles and rags. This was not her world. She had no place in this gleaming room where decisions worth billions were made. But Mercer's expression was patient, and so she left the cart in the hallway and walked inside. For the first time in 3 years, Elena Vargas stood in the center of the boardroom. The light from the wall screen cast soft blue patterns across her uniform. She felt the curiosity, the skepticism, and in a few faces, a flicker of resentment. People who had spent years climbing ladders did not like being shown up by someone they had never bothered to notice. Mercer leaned against the edge of the table. "The error you found," he said, "it wasn't obvious. Our algorithm didn't catch it. Why did you?" Elena considered the question carefully. She had no desire to embarrass anyone, but she also knew that the truth was simple and powerful. "The algorithm follows rules," she said. "It sees what it's programmed to see. But a person who understands the logic behind the numbers can feel when something is out of balance. The flow was wrong. It felt wrong." "You felt it," Mercer said, almost to himself. He looked at the young analyst who had dismissed her with a laugh minutes earlier. The analyst's face was now pale, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen as if hoping the floor would swallow him. Mercer addressed the room. "This woman just saved us from a $30 million penalty. She saved a deal worth $200 million. And she did it while pushing a cleaning cart." He let the silence stretch. "I want everyone here to think about that tonight. Really think about it." He turned back to Elena. Would you be willing to speak with me privately? After this meeting concludes?" She walked out of the boardroom, her cartwheels squeaking slightly as she moved down the hallway. The security guard at the end of the corridor glanced up from his phone and gave her a puzzled look. She smiled faintly and continued her work. The rest of her shift passed in a strange haze. Word had begun to spread through the building. People who normally looked through her suddenly made eye contact. The receptionist who had handed her a replacement ID badge months ago without ever learning her name now called out, "Good evening, Elena," as she passed. Mirror. It felt surreal, like a dream where the rules of the world had suddenly flipped. At 7 o'clock, Elena finished mopping the breakroom floor and went to the small locker room where service staff changed. She washed her hands carefully, looking at her reflection in the spotted mirror. Her hair was streaked with gray pulled back in a tight bun. Her face showed lines of exhaustion and quiet endurance. She had spent a decade trying to be invisible, and now, in a single afternoon, that invisibility had shattered. "Mr. Mercer is ready for you now. Please follow me." Elena walked through the building as the last rays of sunset streamed through the glass walls. The HR woman led her to a private elevator that required a security code. They ascended to the top floor, where Daniel Mercer's office occupied the entire eastern wing. The door was open. Inside, the office was surprisingly understated. a large wooden desk, shelves filled with books, a window that overlooked the city skyline. Mercer sat not behind his desk but on a simple chair near a small circular table. Across from him sat an empty chair. He gestured for Elena to sit. Thank you for coming," he said. Elena sat. The chair was comfortable, more comfortable than any piece of furniture she had ever owned. She folded her hands in her lap. "I looked at your personnel file," Mercer began. "There's not much there. A high school diploma from Mexico, employment history mostly in cleaning services, a few references. Nothing about a graduate program. Nothing that would ever tell me you could do what you did today. My degree was left unfinished," Elena said quietly. The university records would still exist, I suppose. But those years feel like a different life. Tell me about that different life." So she did. She told him about growing up in a small town outside Guadalajara, about winning a scholarship to the National University, about discovering a love for numbers that felt almost spiritual. She told him about meeting her husband, a kind and brilliant engineer named Tomás. She described their small apartment filled with notebooks and dreams, and then she described the diagnosis, the slow unraveling, the medical treatments that drained their savings and her attention. She had left the program with only a semester remaining, and then they had moved north seeking better care. Tomás was stable now, she said, but required constant support. The cleaning job was steady, predictable, and it allowed her to be home in the evenings. Mercer listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I have built my entire career on finding talent," he said finally. "I pride myself on recognizing potential. And yet you've been working under my nose for 3 years, and I never once thought to ask who you were." He leaned forward. "That is a failure. Not just for me personally but for the entire structure I've created. A company that cannot see the brilliance right in front of it is a company that is fundamentally broken." Elena did not know how to respond. She had never imagined hearing such words from a man like Daniel Mercer. "I would like to offer you a position," he said. "A real position, in our risk analysis division. The salary would be substantially higher than what you earn now. You would have flexible hours, and we would accommodate your family situation. I am not asking you to abandon your husband. I am asking you to use the mind you clearly still possess." Elena felt her throat tighten. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. Another part of her was terrified. The world of high finance was a brutal arena, and she was a woman who cleaned toilets. But beneath the fear, a tiny ember of the person she used to be flickered. The woman who had once solved complex equations for the sheer joy of it. The woman who still dreamed in numbers. "I need to think about it," she said. "And I need to speak with my husband. Take all the time you need." That night, Elena returned to the modest apartment where Tomás waited in his wheelchair by the window, a blanket draped over his thin legs. She told him everything, the boardroom, the numbers, the CEO's offer. "You have given me everything for so many years," he said. Now you have a chance to take something back for yourself. You must take it, Elena, please." The next morning, Elena called the number Mercer had given her. She accepted the job under 2 conditions: that her schedule remain flexible to care for Tomás, and that she would not be paraded around as some kind of trophy for corporate diversity initiatives. She wanted to work, not to be a symbol. Mercer agreed without hesitation. Elena's transition into the risk analysis division was not seamless. There were whispers. A few mid-level executives resented her sudden elevation. They called her the janitor analyst behind her back. But the young man whose model she had fixed, the same analyst who had laughed at her in the boardroom, became one of her most unexpected allies. His name was Ryan, and he approached her on her 3rd day with a genuine apology. "He was arrogant," he said. "I'd like to learn from you if you're willing to teach me." Elena saw the sincerity in his eyes and simply nodded. From that day forward, Ryan sat beside her whenever he could, asking questions about her approach to modeling, about how she saw patterns that others missed. Slowly, the office culture around her began to shift. Meanwhile, something deeper was changing within Daniel Mercer. He found himself noticing things he had always ignored. The barista in the lobby who memorized everyone's regular orders. The maintenance worker who hummed classical music while repairing ceiling tiles. The security guard who used to watch Elena pause outside the boardroom. A man named Marcus, who had once been an architect in his home country before visa issues had forced him into a different life. Mercer began to institute new programs. A skills discovery initiative gave every employee, regardless of position, the opportunity to submit ideas and demonstrate hidden talents. Scholarship funds were established for service workers who wanted to pursue further education. It wasn't charity, it was an acknowledgement that the company's most valuable resources might be hiding in plain sight. One afternoon, 3 months after the deal was saved, Mercer called a company-wide meeting. He stood on a stage in the atrium, the entire workforce gathered below. He spoke about the European acquisition, which had closed successfully and exceeded all profit expectations. Then he asked Elena to come to the stage. She walked forward slowly, no longer in a gray uniform but in a simple dark dress, still modest, still understated. The applause that erupted was genuine and sustained. She did not smile for the cameras. She simply accepted a small glass plaque acknowledging her contribution and returned to her seat. After the meeting, a junior custodian approached her in the hallway. The young man looked to be in his early 20s, with tired eyes that mirrored her own from years ago. "Miss Vargas," he said, "I just wanted to say, I'm studying engineering at night. No one here knows, but after hearing your story I think maybe I can finish." Elena placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You can. And you will." That evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Elena sat at her new desk on the 36th floor. Her computer displayed a financial model, but she was not looking at the numbers. She was looking out the window, watching the tiny figures of people moving along the sidewalks far below. They were delivery drivers and street sweepers and office workers heading home, so many invisible souls, so many stories never told. The door to her cubicle opened, and Daniel Mercer stepped inside. He had a habit of wandering the office at odd hours. He held 2 cups of coffee and offered one to her. May I?" he asked, nodding toward the guest chair. She nodded. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you told me in that first meeting. That the algorithm sees rules, but a person feels the balance. I've tried to build my entire company on data and logic, but the most valuable correction this company ever received came from intuition. From a feeling." Elena sipped the coffee. It was warm and bitter the way she liked it. "Numbers are not cold, Mr. Mercer. They carry stories. People who only see the surface miss the story." He nodded slowly. "I have a proposal," he said. "Not a job offer this time, a partnership. I want to create a new division that focuses entirely on overlooked talent. People like you, people like Marcus. I want you to lead it." Elena set down her cup. She thought of the young custodian, of the dreams still flickering inside so many invisible hearts. She thought of her own long journey, from the classroom in Mexico to the corridors of this glass tower. "Only if we do it quietly," she said. "No big announcements. No marketing campaign. Just real help, for real people." Mercer smiled, an expression that had become more common on his face in recent months. Quietly then. The lights of the city flickered on as darkness fell. Somewhere in the building, a maintenance worker began humming a familiar melody. The elevators opened and closed, carrying people from floor to floor. The marble still gleamed. The coffee still smelled of imported beans. But something in the air had shifted, something that had no number and no variable, yet was the most valuable asset of all. Because the people who had once been invisible were finally being seen, and the ones who had learned to look were discovering that the world was infinitely richer than they had ever imagined. Elena finished her coffee and turned back to her screen. The numbers waited, ready to tell their stories. She placed her fingers on the keyboard and began.